In 701 BC, the kingdom of Judah faced annihilation. The Assyrian Empire, the dominant superpower of the ancient Near East, was systematically conquering the region, and its forces were closing in on Jerusalem. Facing overwhelming odds, Judah's political counselors scrambled for a survival strategy. They looked south, seeking a military alliance with Egypt to break the impending siege. The prophet Isaiah documented this geopolitical crisis in chapter 31 of his text, laying out a stark contrast between relying on human military coalitions and trusting in divine protection. The chapter opens with verse 1, "Woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not unto the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord." This ancient relief shows an Egyptian pharaoh riding a chariot and drawing a bow, illustrating the exact military technology Judah hoped to acquire. They were attempting to reinforce their weakest point, their cavalry, by leaning on what Isaiah called an arm of flesh. The prophet identifies this alliance as a profound theological failure. By trusting the physical strength and numerical superiority of the Egyptian army, the Judean leadership was actively ignoring the Holy One of Israel. No matter the scale of the cavalry, an alliance built entirely on physical military might is powerless when standing in opposition to a divine decree. Isaiah continues his critique in verse 2. "Yet he also is wise, and will bring evil, and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers, and against the help of them that work iniquity." The politicians in Jerusalem thought their diplomatic maneuvers were shrewd. Isaiah counters that the Lord possesses true wisdom, and he will execute judgment on these counselors for their flawed strategy. God will not retract his spoken word. The decree allowing the Assyrian army to march on Judah is set and will proceed exactly as ordained. This reality is made explicit in verse 3. "Now the Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses flesh and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is holpen shall fall down, and they all shall fail together." When divine judgment is executed, the physical realities become instantly apparent. The helper, Egypt, and the helped, Judah, will collapse under the weight of the Assyrian offensive. True security cannot be brokered politically. Human flesh, no matter how heavily armored, will fail against the ultimate authority of divine spirit. While human armies were destined to fail, the text pivots to an absolute promise of divine protection for Jerusalem. This specific promise introduces a typological structure, creating striking parallels between the geopolitical layout of 701 BC and the modern conflicts of 1967 AD. This transition is marked in verse 4. "For thus hath the Lord spoken unto me, like as the lion and the young lion roaring on his prey, when a multitude of shepherds is called forth against him, he will not be afraid of their voice, nor abase himself for the noise of them. So shall the Lord of hosts come down to fight for Mount Zion, and for the hill thereof." Isaiah uses the metaphor of an apex predator. Just as a powerful lion will stand over its prey, roaring to defend its territory, the Lord of hosts promises to defend Mount Zion. In this analogy, the multitude of shepherds trying to shout down the lion represents the encroaching forces of the Assyrian army, attempting to gather Jerusalem like a final sheep. This precise imagery maps exactly to the events of the Six-Day War in June 1967, when Jewish forces fought to recapture the Old City. During the push to take the city, the 55th Paratrooper Brigade was tasked with securing the Temple Mount through the Lion's Gate. The commander of this brigade was Nasi-Berer. In Hebrew, the name Gur translates literally to lion cub or young lion. They were supported by the 10th Armored Brigade, known as the Harel Brigade, commanded by Colonel Ben Ari. This is a photograph of those Israeli paratroopers overlooking the Temple Mount shortly after taking the position. The name of their armored commander, Ari, translates precisely to lion. The ancient poetic language served as a highly specific, predictive naming convention for the exact military commanders who would eventually liberate the city. Isaiah immediately follows the lion metaphor with verse 5. "As birds flying, so will the Lord of hosts defend Jerusalem. Defending also he will deliver it, and passing over he will preserve it." The imagery shifts from a roaring lion to an aerial view, depicting a flock of birds flying directly overhead, diving down to actively protect and preserve their nest. This metaphor of a hovering, flying defense aligns with the opening operational tactic of the Six-Day War on Monday morning, June 5, 1967. The Israeli Air Force launched a devastating surprise attack, flying as low as 6 feet over the Mediterranean at supersonic speeds to avoid radar detection. In under 3 hours, they destroyed almost 500 aircraft, neutralizing the air forces of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Complete air dominance provided the literal flying defense required for the ground forces to advance safely. This image shows the aftermath, a desert road littered with countless destroyed Egyptian vehicles, the direct result of that absolute air superiority. The ancient text anticipated the specific mechanical realities of modern warfare, detailing the exact operational tactic of overwhelming air cover necessary to achieve victory. Before this ultimate deliverance could manifest, the nation of Judah had to undergo a deliberate spiritual shift, turning entirely away from their rebellion. Isaiah calls for this repentance in verse 6. "Turn ye unto him from whom the children of Israel have deeply revolted." He details the required action in verse 7. "For in that day every man shall cast away his idols of silver, and his idols of gold, which your own hands have made unto you for a sin." The people were required to physically discard their material idols. Historically, this aligns with the sweeping religious purges led by King Hezekiah, who ordered the destruction of pagan shrines and silver and gold artifacts across the kingdom. The immediate result of this national repentance is recorded in verse 8. "Then shall the Assyrian fall with the sword, not of a mighty man, and the sword not of a mean man shall devour him. But he shall flee from the sword, and his young men shall be discomfited." This carving depicts subjects submitting to the Assyrian Empire, demonstrating the overwhelming power of their forces at the time. Yet in 701 BC, the Assyrian army was decimated, not by the swords of Judean soldiers or their Egyptian allies, but by direct divine intervention. Historical and scriptural records point to an incomprehensible scale of defeat, with 185,000 Assyrian soldiers dying in a single night outside the gates of Jerusalem. The entire military equation was bypassed. Survival depended solely on spiritual alignment and the execution of divine power. The chapter concludes with verse 9. "And he shall pass over to his stronghold for fear, and his princes shall be afraid of the ensign, saith the Lord, whose fire is in Zion, and his furnace in Jerusalem." Following the decimation of his forces, the Assyrian king Sennacherib abandoned the siege and fled back to his stronghold in Nineveh, overcome by sheer terror at the Lord's protective ensign over Judah. Isaiah references a fire in Zion and a furnace in Jerusalem. This is a direct reference to Ariel, the altar of the temple. The Assyrian army, attempting to consume the city, was instead symbolically placed on that altar and sacrificed. Here we see a photograph of Rabbi Shlomo Goren reading a declaration on the newly liberated Temple Mount in 1967. His name translates to threshing floor. The armored unit that helps secure the area, the Harel Brigade, carries a name that literally means altar or mountain of God, connecting directly back to Isaiah's fiery furnace in Zion. From the ancient collapse of the Assyrian siege to the lightning-fast tactical victories of the Six-Day War, the historical record points to a single through line. The survival and liberation of Jerusalem never rested on the strength of political alliances or numbers, but entirely in the sovereign hands of the